Welcome back, or just welcome to Aria's Politics. So, I wanted to do a video on the state legislatures. Sorry, obviously, essentially all my videos are going to be on that. But before we dive into specific states and what their legislative have been doing and what the makeup looks like, I wanted to lay a ground base or a baseline of kind of what their legislative capacity is and what they tend to spend their legislative energy on and what they overlook regarding our kind of like top four issues. So, I'll also say right off the bat that this is not something that I know a ton about. So, correct me if I'm wrong. I will be speaking in very, very broad terms here, and I'll wait to get into the specifics for when, I actually do go state by state. So yeah, that'll be 50 videos to look forward to, or we'll see. So the broad overarching narrative seems to be that state legislative activity is really confined to very narrow, very politically easy, kind of legally unambiguous, legislation. And again, exceptions, always exceptions, but we're talking about generally, broadly speaking, this is where they spend most of their attention and their energy on. I don't want this to come off as any sort of blame or judgment. The way that the state legislators operate is very understandable, right? They have their sectors carved out. They know what is constitutional, what isn't. They know what's going to pass. They know what their base is going to like. Essentially, what I think about it is that they play it safe. And again, not always, right? There are those states that, every now and then we'll get a redistricting or something will push those limits. But for the most part, the bulk of the legislation is playing it safe. And it's doing these things that they know that their base will that again, won't have any sort of federal legal contest. And also that won't take away any of their own power or authority, which we'll get to that one later. And this is kind of worked functionality wise. The states have played in their playground and they've, managed to do some things and incremental changes or whatever, blah, 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 blah. However, as always, we're at a moment where we just need more. Playing it safe is no longer an acceptable option because playing it safe is basically our own destruction. So we're sort of done. We're sort of past that phase, right? And the states are still very much, or the state legislators, I should say, are still very much in that phase. And again, I'm not blaming, no blame, no judgment. I'm not, these people, right? These individual human beings are just trying to do their best. Most of them are genuinely good people trying to help and support their communities. This is not Congress. like I mean, obviously there are those. There are some who are, egomaniacal men who just are out for their own glory and power, being a state senator. But for the most part, these are just decent human beings, right? Trying to like live their life and do their best, and make laws that help out their state and their people. And again, this is not so I want to make that clear, is that when I talk about these, I am not placing any blame on any of the individual state senators or state assembly people. I am not placing any blame on like the system. Sorry, I am placing blame on the system as a whole. But not the individuals, right? They're just doing their best. So let's talk about it. So let's talk about these areas, right? So let's start with AI regulation because it's the newest one and it's kind of it's a weird one, right? Obviously. Because there's no like constitutional precedent for AI regulation. And a lot of these things that states are trying to enact, right, will be contested by the federal government, and will be. And part of that reason is because the federal government is being controlled by the billionaires who are all creating the AI companies, and that's why they're billionaires, right? Is because we're living in this AI bubble. So if a state and this is kind of like the forefront of the state federal kind of legislative battle, if you will, over the past year or 2 years, is that the states have put a couple of, I think it's climate and AI regulation actually, have tried to do a couple of things, and they've been legally contested by the federal government. The federal government doesn't want any of the states regulating any AI stuff. And again, that's because the AI billionaires who fund the politicians' campaigns don't want it. So here we are. So what happened? So as a response, so because of that, so what do states do, right? Well, the data centers is like the big one, right? Data centers is kind of like the forefront of the fight. And I think that this is a really clean and easy issue, because nobody's really for data centers, right? Other than these AI billionaires. And so it's cross aisle. Like most people are like, yeah, no, I don't want this huge energy resource suck, in my backyard. So it's a pretty good kind of battlefield, if you will. So that's risen to the forefront, and I think that it'll be interesting to see where that goes and how that develops. And I think that does make sense to me, right? The states should be focusing on, or not, if not focusing, they should be on this issue, right? And they should definitely use whatever power they have to regulate the data centers. The other place that they tend to enact a lot of their legislation is, again, the same story, right? These tiny bite-size, legally unambiguous, politically cheap methods of like, no child pornography deepfakes, Yeah, great. And great. You're right. That shouldn't exist, or like you have to label your slop AI slop. So they tend to try and do small little things like that. Again, this is the story that we'll keep coming back to, right? It is these small, incremental, narrow, sectoral areas that the state does. And again, not to say that any of that is wrong, right? I'm not saying that a law banning, using AI to fabricate child pornography is bad. Go right ahead. what I will keep coming back to is that it takes legislative energy and it takes money and it takes people power, our time, our energy, our focus, our concentration to pass these little tiny things. And I would argue that all of that energy, all of that human brain power, all of that knowledge would be better spent in other areas. And this is the theme, right? So AI regulation, again, as I said, I think the data centers thing is a valid one, right? But beyond that, it's like you can't, like, instead of just saying, no, don't put any data centers here, there are other state mechanisms that can be used when you take the picture as a whole, right? And I think that'll be what exactly I mean might become a little bit more clear as I go through each of the issues, right? So for instance, with the data centers, you can say no data centers. You can also say, if you build a data center here, you can only use so much water. Or if you do use this much water, then you need to spend this much money cleaning the water supply, right? Or you have to make sure that every single household along that entire watershed has a top of the line filter. Or, right, whatever. Again, be creative here is the point. The point is that within the state jurisdiction, there is actually a lot that can be done that is not done because the legislators are so caught up and focused on these like narrowly defined, politically cheap, legally unambiguous areas. So while they're over here doing this, there's like this that we should just shift to. And I think climate is a really good example of that, right? So what do states do? Well, first of all, what can states do, right? What's their legislative capacity when it comes to climate and environment? A lot of it, like there is a carbon emissions, right? Kind of within, I think it's with corporations within the state bounds. I might be wrong. There is like there's water rights. Basically, states have full control over the water that is within their boundaries. Land conservation, those are kind of like the big ones. Where they spend, let's see, I'm going to have to look this up because I don't actually remember. Aha, okay. So where they actually get where they spend a lot of their money are on things like building codes and gas bans, right? So your hookup this I think was a big one in New York, where if you can no longer have a gas hookup, you have to have a what are those called? Those stoves. It starts with an I. Induction. Right? And so it's like tons and tons of time and money and energy was spent on this, and like that thing is pretty minor, right? It's a pretty minor policy area. I mean, I want not area, but just like effectiveness, right? So a lot of it is again on this carbon tax, emission tax, ceilings. Oh yeah, there was a climate super fund, and then this was also contested by where I believe the states wanted to tax like the fossil fuel companies retroactively, and the federal government was like, no, not allowed again, because who pays for the federal government? It's the executives of the fossil fuel companies. So they were like, no, and that's been kind of tied up in litigation. I don't know a lot about this at all. Anyway, point being. No, again, we have the same story, right? We're like, none of this is bad. It's not like making new houses not have a gas line or have an induction stove instead of a gas line is bad. It's not like creating carbon market, right? It's called cap and invest, which is what New York did, which is that I think it's like above a certain amount, you have, companies above a certain amount of whatever fossil fuels that they're emitting, they have to invest that money into, healthcare or whatever it is. I don't remember. It's probably the environment, right? I don't know. And this is sort of what we get, right? We get these like, I sort of think about it like a person recycling, right? Like I'm going to recycle and I do it because I just do, right? But let's not pretend that if I don't recycle, it's going to have any impact on the climate or the environment. Whether or not I recycle is really not the point. First of all, it's unclear whether our recycling items actually get recycled and not just thrown into the landfill to begin with. But even if they were, it's like, it's such a small, minor piece. And the fact that these companies put the onus on individuals to, like, again, recycle or choose, whatever, your batteries, like, it's not bad. I'm not a bad person for recycling, right? I'm a good person. I'm doing the right thing. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. I'm doing what I was told to do. State legislators are just like that. They are doing what they are supposed to be doing. They are doing what they were told to do. New York City made this cap in trade, or this cap and trade investment program, cap and invest, program. Like it was applauded, and all the Democrats were like, yay, like look at this amazing piece of climate legislation. But here's the thing, is that doesn't actually help the earth or the environment at all. It just allows the companies to do what they're doing and then funny more money into the economy and circle it around each other, essentially. So it's all misguided and it's all misdirected, is my point. So what should they be doing? What should states be focusing on instead of these little, regulations? Well, in terms of climate, as I mentioned, land conservation and water. Focus there, right? Let's put all of this legislative energy and, human knowledge and other money and resources into regenerating our land, cleaning our waters. Let's focus it there. That should be our focus, is how do we give back to the land? How do we plant more trees? How do we, whatever all of this is, that should be where all of our focus goes, at least for in the immediate sense, right? And in terms of what a state can do. Right? As I said, the state can regulate its water usage. It can regulate the water pollution. Now, I know water doesn't have state boundaries, and what one state will do, another one might not care about. But this is where we're at, right? You gotta create a model so that other states can follow it. So, and again, I'm open to other suggestions. I'm not saying that like this is the end all be it, that like land conservation and water, is where we should put everything. Although like I mean, do you have a better idea? Please let me know. um, as I said, this is not an area that I have thought like extensively about, so I am open to other thoughts and suggestions. It's just, to me, this feels like the easiest place to start. Okay, so after that we have, I guess we've got electoral reform is where we'll go. So this fight has, and when I say fight, I mean the state versus federal government fight, has been kind of like, it's the redistricting, right? The redistricting has been chomping back and forth, back and forth. And the underlying premise is that the states have control over state and local elections, right? They can do whatever they want. There was a lot of redistricting, of recent redistricting news, and I'm going to apologize because I just haven't kept up with it because I can't. There's only so much. So I don't know exactly where it all has landed, but I'm going to assume that, you know, the federal government basically says no one's allowed, that you have to you have to gerrymander. I'm sure that's not what happened. But anyway, point being, the redistricting issue. Okay, sorry. Let's step back a second first. Electoral reform. So again, once again, same story, right? Where states go is they go to easy, politically cheap, you know, legally uncontested areas like voter ID laws. 2025 was a turning point in this, which kind of shows just how creepy things have really become, is that it was the first year where there were more restrictive voting laws than there were expansive. And that's just like fucked up and sad. You know, why? Why are you people spending this energy, and again, this human intellect and energy, on restricting people's ability to vote? Go fuck yourselves. You know, it's so gross, and it's so unnecessary, and it's so sad, because it's not like aren't other things that you could be spending your time on. Land and water. Let's work on that. But instead, you small-minded people are trying to squeeze out every possible vote you can to maintain your own power. And that's all it is, right? It's just the story about maintaining your own power. And this is where the redistricting thing comes in, is because state legislators could make a statute that says that redistricting has to be an independent commission, you know, and they're going to go and do it every 6 years or whatever. But they don't, because if they did that, it would remove their power, and it would take away their own personal ability to maintain their district, right? The majority Democratic district or whatever it is. So that's like that's kind of like the real ugly side of these state legislators, that at the end of the day, they're politicians who are interested in their own self-preservation and their own re-election. Something like term limits, I think, would help that, right? What if you, or just, again, a general overarching social collective culture of doing things for the self-interest of the community and the world and the people and the animals and nature, as opposed to just your own personal self-interest, right? Again, here's this battle that is being waged on so many fronts. But ultimately, that's the kind of politician that we want, right? We want the politicians who are more aligned or more driven by love of their community and wanting to help out the entity as opposed to the fear-based personal power. And so this redistricting thing is just like a funny little example of it, right? Is because no state legislator or no state kind of like legislative body votes to get to secede their power to something else because they know that that means that they might not win the next election. And it's sad, obviously, but again, here we are. So what do? So instead of tackling something like gerrymandering, they do voter ID laws, and they do, let's see, I've got a couple of other things listed here. What else do we do? Ranked choice voting bans, like, ugh, come on, please. Campaign finance is the other biggie that, and this is one that they really actually don't have a huge amount of authority over. Thank you, Citizens United. Yeah, they can't really pass massive campaign finance reform that is something that needs to do as a constitutional amendment or on the federal level. I think they can do publicly funded campaigns, but I don't know exactly that. But again, this is where we can get creative, right? The point is that instead of wasting this time and energy banning people from voting, and again, and no, on the Democratic side, they do things like that, like felony disenfranchisement, right, where they try and expand voting rights, more access to mail-in voting, and all that stuff. And again, none of this is bad and none of this is wrong, and I think a world where everyone votes and it's easy to vote is definitely a more democratic world. But it's narrow, right? And again, all of these are very narrow-minded. Is that, well, you could also have automatic voter registration, right? You could also just, as I said, put some, focus. Well, the redistricting is really the big one, I gotta admit. And I'm trying to I don't. Yeah, it's kind of like, I mean, there could be public matching, but I'm not even sure that. I wonder if you could do something like ban political advertising or something like that. I'm not sure, but anyway, that's essentially, that's electoral reform, in a nutshell. And then finally, we have wealth. Ooh, yeah. Okay, taxes. This is fascinating. I use that term liberally, I admit. But it's a really interesting, I think, topic and moment in time. The reason is because states have broad taxing authority. They really do. It's probably the area that they have, I mean, other than like controlling their elections. But other than that, they have very, very wide-ranging ability to tax. And and yet, and yet, and yet they stay very, very much in their lane of income tax, right? And corporate tax. Um, and it's like, okay, we're going to raise the income tax bracket this or this much, and our corporate taxes this much, and whether or not the corporation, has a nexus in our state or not, means that we can tax them a certain amount. And what ends up happening, once again, is that these major, major swaths end up going untaxed or just like really not even dealt with. Investment property is kind of a huge one. While yes, states do have property taxes, not a lot, or I don't know how many of them, but I know New York doesn't. Or New York has a set. No, New York doesn't have a separate tax class for very specific investment owned properties. Right. It's been discussed, and constantly things like this will come up in a committee and just sort of die there, right? But there's a really broad leeway here, and states aren't really working within that channel. So I think investment property is huge, or just even just physical property is a massive area that goes pretty undertaxed. And this is because, right, again, this ultimate thing is because income is taxed, but assets aren't. And so this is what we have seeing in California with Proposition 40 coming up on the ballot. Now, it's important to note that Prop 40 is a ballot initiative and not a state legislative clause. And so remember what I said about the legislator likes to play it safe. And this is an example of that, right? Instead of them just passing a law, they're putting it as a ballot initiative. And this is because the state legislator didn't pass it as a law, right? So an organization, a group had to kind of like get the signatures to put it on the ballot. And so why didn't it? And I don't know. I'm sure I can look into that, but off the top of my head, I don't know. I don't know why the state didn't just propose it. Maybe they thought that, again, it would be tied up in legal, or that their billionaire tax base would leave, or whatever it is. But what's happening here is very interesting because it's called the billionaire tax, and basically it's that anyone who owns above $1 billion in assets has to pay a one-time tax of 5% of the entirety of their wealth. And the billionaires are not happy about this. And they are spending millions of dollars. Not only are they spending millions of dollars on a public assault campaign on it, but they have also put 2 ballot initiatives on the same ballot. So it's like Prop 40 is billionaire tax, and 41 and 42, either one of which pass cancels out Prop 40. That's how freaking sneaky they are. And on top of all of this is that ballot initiatives are legendary for being confusing and not able and misunderstood. No, I haven't read the language of these exact 3, but I can guarantee that they are confusing as fuck, and that most people won't, on first read, won't know what the hell they're talking about, because they never do. They never make any sense. And you're sort of like, what? And this is what happens. They're in this like purposefully confusing language, I think. But regardless, so the billionaires are assaulting the public, the California public, with vote no on Prop 40. There was an AI generated ad that apparently, well, not apparently, but I saw it, was like a Trojan horse pig being led by a Bernie Sanders lookalike, not him, an AI generated Bernie Sanders lookalike. That was basically that devolved into the suited tax people, government tax people inside the Trojan pig bursting out and proceeding to ransack the neighborhood and steal like a kid's scooter and a person's boat and a mother and her like a stroller. They're like basically stealing a child, and you're like, what is happening here? And they're trying to paint the picture that if the billionaire tax goes through, eventually the state taxing, well, they're not just going to tax billionaires, they're going to tax everyone. And like this is the tagline, is that it's not a billionaire tax, it's an everyone tax. Which is so stupid, because it literally is just a billionaire tax. It is just for people who have a net worth of over $1 billion. And most people like know that they don't, right? Like most people can very much say like, I don't have $1 billion. I know that. I can just check that box and be like, not me. And then the lucky few, 12 to 15 of them, get to pay a couple of millions of dollars for healthcare, so that everybody else in the state can have healthcare. Anyway, that's fun. Let's see how that goes. So anyway, so that's okay. The point being is that there's the conversation about a wealth tax is being had, and it's being had now. And I think that there is broad latitude here for the states, not just in terms of propositions, but in terms of taxing properties, taxing investment assets. You're always going to get the pushback, right? You're always going to get the, well, if you tax the billionaires, they're just going to leave. And yeah, that could be true, right? I mean, it's a lot easier for Elon Musk to move from California to Texas than it is to like renounce your US citizenship and move to Nigeria, or anywhere else in the world. Take your pick. And so I do get that in terms of the states levels, right? You can be like, well, the billionaire are just going to leave. Yeah, but like, again, this is where like the assets come into play, right? It's like, sure, but if you have a house, if you have a $50 million house in the Hamptons, you still have that house in the Hamptons, and the state can still tax that house. And if you own a bunch of stock portfolios, and the company is located in wherever, in North Dakota can tax that, Again, I'm not trying to say any of this in terms of actual policies. I'm trying to say this in terms of political will, right? Because the policies follow after the political will, right? The nuts and the bolts and the technical aspects will come after that. The point is that there is legislative capacity here, and the boundaries have just started to be pressed against. And this is where we're at, right? Again, to bring us back to the broad overall narrative here, which is that these narrow incremental moves, while they might be laudable and they might be honest and they might be, or some of them, right? Obviously, voter disenfranchisement is not. They're just not what we need right now. And these state legislators that have spent their career working within this system and, pushing for these incremental, bite-sized little nuggets, I think either need to step it up and get ready for, and be bold, honestly. This is it. This is our moment. This is the moment, right? This is the moment where we can't be complacent, is that we can't play it safe. You could have done that. All of these initiatives would have been great if it was 30 years ago. But that moment has passed. And now you need to be aggressive, right? We are in this moment where we need aggressive policy. We need massive reformation. We need huge political change. And the way to do that is to flood the market, right? And we need to flood it, assault it on all fronts, on all sides, from all states, any states that can. And so these are just a few, as I said, areas, the kind of big ones. And these are just a few policies that we could focus on. Open to more. I think that this is an evolving conversation. I know, it's 2026, right? So I know that there's not, the legislator is kind of already set. But for the most, yes. Even though they're all up for re-election, or a lot of them are up for re-election in November, the primaries are done, the legislature's set, we're sort of we're in where we are, right? But 2028 isn't. And this is what I'm building towards, is a massive, massive restructuring of the state legislators to put in humans who are willing to fight and make these aggressive, boundary-pushing laws. And I'm not blaming, I'm not judging any of you state legislators. I'm just saying either step up or maybe it's time to move on. And maybe if you're not in it for the fight and if you're not up for it, which I get, do you, go live your life. But get out of the way so that somebody else who is up for it and who is excited about it and who is willing to work endlessly for these boundary pushing laws can take your place and can come into office. And that's where I think we should be headed. All right, more on the individual states to come. Thanks for listening.